The other concern was RRU, which many were treating as some other kind of safe house. Also, the government responded that it's a police gazetted operating area, and so it is within the law. Yeah, so maybe as a concern, as a person from the civil society, on the other hand, our concern would be the way it operates, which seems to be away from the established police standards and operations, and possibly that's what led it to be questioned, its operations.
How does it operate? Give us some detail.
Well, its operations are a bit unclear. No one knows what they do.
Us a classic case.
All you hear is someone has done X and he's at RRU. For example, a gentleman who recently published a book, and the next day you hear
Vincent Zaramba.
The next day you hear he's at RRU. Might be the next day he's charged, or might be. So what people would ask is, if he committed an offense in was it Kawempe?
Yes.
Why not be taken to Kawempe police station? Why be taken to Kireka, the other side of town? So that kind of operation, of course, leaves question marks into the whys and how, and that is seriously a challenge.
Is this widespread? The kind of people disappear and then all of a sudden you find them in RRU 48 hours later or something?
Well, it's not widespread. It's actually not widespread. It seems to be for
special
cases. Well, I wouldn't tell what someone needs to have done to go there. That's an issue of police to explain. But it seems to be for particular cases who end up there.
So it's not that bad. Safe houses, we've moved a step forward. We no longer have safe houses.
The challenge with safe houses is it's also difficult to quantify them because they are not open to the public.
Well, but if someone has been jailed and released, well, even if it's 9 months later, I tell you I was blindfolded and taken to place. So we know they exist.
At least most of the recent reports, I've not seen reports of people detained in unknown places like it was, I think, during the times towards the time when ADF was active, the times of throwing bombs in Kampala. Right now, we seem to, you rarely get those reports. Well, you might get a few reports of torture where might be an officer in UPDF or police, or because we have so many security agencies.
So is that an issue as well?
It's not an issue. The issue here is if an officer might be in any of those, tortured someone, and somehow might be he reported to the Human Rights Commission, and the things have not worked out. The mere fact that he was tortured is a problem. If you read the Human Rights Commission reports locally, you'll see that torture, I think, could be one of the most committed human rights violation, and I think for the last around the last 8 years running, Uganda police and the UPDF have interchanged being first and second in all those years.
Yes.
So that shows that much as we may not have it high, it's still existing, and only one case of torture is bad enough.
All right, let's talk about something else. Walk to work protests. Paula.
Sure. Walk to work actually figured in many of the country's interventions. Basically, what countries were saying is, first, ensure the right to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression. There should be necessary measures in place that allow people to protest if they have something to protest about. Obviously, not violent protest, but if you are doing a peaceful assembly, you should be able to guarantee that people express what they want to say. But with particular regard to walk to work, what was really highlighted was the fact that there was people who got killed by the police, and that there should be independent and impartial investigations into what happened and who is to be held responsible. And I think one thing that relates to the issue of torture and the safe houses is a question of impunity. And I think really what states were trying to say is, you really have to investigate and hold those perpetrators accountable, because if you don't, then you will have repetition of the same violations over and over again. And even though the state says that police officers who violate are individually responsible, it's the obligation of the state to put in place the measures to hold those people accountable and to investigate the violations that are committed. So many recommendations were made in that regard, to fully investigate what happened and to hold the officers who did extrajudicially kill people accountable.
Let's talk about the upstream part of it. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. Actually, walk to work was predominant, but another interesting aspect that came out was the fact that the 2009 demonstrations in central part of Uganda, mainly
the Kayunga riots.
The Kayunga riots, where many people died. 27, and to date we've not had anyone being held responsible for that. So states were asking what are the measures, what steps has the government of Uganda taken since 2009 to ensure that those police officers or army or whoever, even if it's an individual who did the excesses that led to deaths of those people in 2009 and early this year, to be held responsible and accountable for their violations. Yeah, that featured in Heidi.
All right, but let's look at the upstream part of this freedom of assembly. We have policemen. After the elections, we have a heavy police presence in many places. It wasn't there before. The city square is cordoned off. It's now called the Constitutional Square. Somebody wanted to launch a book the other day. He was told you can't do it here. Somebody tried to take a birthday present. They wanted to hold a birthday party for the president, beloved president, at City Square. They couldn't do it. How would you gauge that? Is that abuse of freedom of assembly, or is it not?
In terms of holding...
police, heavy police presence, there's nothing serious happening, but you have police literally permanently stationed at roundabouts. You have army tents at police stations, a heavier police deployment, and deployment of military operatives. Is that an issue, is it not?
I think police deployment in itself obviously is not an issue.
You don't think it intimidates people?
That's the question. It's how, at what moments that deployment is being made, in what context, if it really is meant to intimidate people. In many instances, it might actually be for questions of protection. I mean, you can't...
It might be a good thing in the end.
It could be, but and this is something that was raised in for example, in the review. Countries said there had never been that level of security deployment during the elections.
Even after, we still have it now.
Even after, and it's maintained. I mean, you clearly see on the roads armed men and all the roundabouts. And this is the question again of, is this a security measure? Is this really because there are credible terrorist threats coming in and you want to have prevention? All these things would be good, but you really have to then discuss with the public saying why you're doing this. If it's a matter of controlling assemblies or making sure that certain roads are not taken up by protests, that's another issue. I mean, you really have to assess why the deployment is there, in what context. So it's really a question of assessment, and it really and how the police engages with the public, and I think that is the stick measure.
Peter.
Yeah, like Paula says, the deployment of police per se is not a violation
on paper. Yes,
on paper. But if you're deploying policemen, might be and they are pointing guns at a community just across, and maybe the community is intimidated. Maybe people can no longer do particular things. Then there questions will start arising. But per se, the deployment, and that was the concern during the review. The concern was not that we have so much police presence. The concern was that the presence might result into fear, that may result into violation of other rights. People might not feel that free if they are all surrounded by policemen. Everywhere you put a step, there is a policeman. Yeah, that was...
Is that a feeling that pervades? Do people feel unsafe because there's a heavier police deployment?
Well, I can't answer in reality what exactly happens, because I can tell you for one thing is in Uganda, if you see what happens is the people would feel safer where there is police than where there is UPDF. That is a bottom line. And we've sometimes during
UPDF
walk
are the
to
police
work,
stations.
sometime during walk to work we had both police and UPDF in both those places.
Yes.
But now they seem to have been withdrawn. There's more of police in roundabouts than you
Well, we
find.
still see some soldiers. Tents,
Yes,
green
you
tents at
still
police
see
stations.
some green tents and a few soldiers walking on the street here and there. My assessment, it has not stopped people from doing what they would do.
Maybe only the
enjoying
criminals.
their rights, possibly only the criminals. But maybe you never know what may come out of it. Yeah, that's
If there's a small skirmish or riot, or it's not even a riot, some demonstration.
some demonstration. Maybe it could be. Well,
All right. Let's talk about the right to life, liberty, and security of a person. Paula, let's talk about the death penalty. Uganda still has it on its statute books, even though it's not widely practiced.
Exactly. I mean, the state was quick to point out that in the past approximately 20 years there hasn't really been an execution. And that the rulings of the court obviously saying that after 3 years, if the execution hasn't happened, you have to convert the sentence into
20.
to death, to life in prison instead of death sentence. Those were definitely highlighted as positive steps in the sense where you're moving towards progressively elimination of the death penalty. But during the review, most countries said it's still in your books, so you have to make efforts to take it out of your books, to ratify the optional protocol to the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, which calls for the abolition of the death penalty. And if you can't take it out of your books right now, at least declare a moratorium on the execution of death penalties. So if you have a moratorium, you're declaring that you will for sure not execute any of those sentences,
Right.
whilst you work towards eliminating that from your legal system. And I think this is one of the points to highlight is, and even on the recommendations that the state said that it had to review, it really had to do with the role of Parliament here, and what is the role of Parliament in passing the laws, amending the laws. But it's important to remember that once you have a human rights obligation as a state, it means the judiciary, it means Parliament, it means also the government. So these recommendations are not only guided towards the cabinet, it's really for the whole state to take on and implement those recommendations. So it really is also a call for Parliament to review the laws that are violating human rights.
Well, you said basically leaving it to the statute books, even though we've not had an execution since I think 1993. It's about 18 years. So even though you don't practice it, another leader could come in and sign all the pending ones.
Exactly.
That's what it means.
Yeah.
Might be something as on my side, something that missed in the review is whereas our records are saying we've not had executions since 93.
Yes.
I think that is on the side of civilians. I think the UPDF
Soldiers still continue to be executed.
Yeah, because around 2003-4 there was an execution in Karamoja where some soldiers were killed, and somehow the states did not talk about this, the military aspect of it, because the state response, Uganda's response was that we have this court case that was, I think, Susan Chigula versus Attorney General, where the court declared that these people, if they are to be put on remand, they have to be executed within 3 years. If the 3 years pass, then it becomes a life. And it effectively meant that from that date, people who were in prison had their sentences become life. This seems not to be the case with the military, like I've said.
Right.
We have a field court martial which can
sit under a tree.
Can sit under a tree, execute, and even
and go and wipe their hands and go and do other things. Go and sit in the office like nothing happened.
Yeah. The state was saying it's a bit not mandatory. Just I think 1 month back, someone was sentenced to death by the military court martial. It's around a month back. I don't remember the exact date. So you see, yes, as if from the civilian side we seem to be moving away from it.
You want the soldiers to end it,
but also from the other side, it's still there. And so, since human rights apply to all human beings equally, then it should be across board.
That's an interesting one. Listeners, you can call in now. Our numbers 0414-348-111, 0312-260-390, 0312-261-390. That one is probably going to be a difficult one. Maybe, but maybe not. Spectrum, hello. Yes, your name?
Good evening. Thanks for the guests in the studio. Jimmy is the name.
Yes, Jimmy.
I want to thank them for the good work they are trying to do. My concern is one. We talk of possibility of trial of state operatives and officers of the forces who cause maybe loss of life. But one thing is very clear. The court process in Uganda today will take a very long time to convict such people. There is only one case, I think, which was conducted conclusively. Magalhães, Ramadan Magalhães, okay, is in prison. But now, we have dates that we have recorded recently. You mentioned the 2009 riots. You've mentioned the earlier around this time, I think, when there was the walk to work. And somebody is talking about individual officers being arraigned before the courts. But our courts here, we know, will take a very long time. Now, can Paula advise whether there is another litigation that the public can take on a broader perspective with the international courts? Because some think the regime will live there forever and they will die with their sins without anyone bring them to book. Let's have comment on that. Thanks.
Spectrum, hello.
Hello.
Your name, sir?
Good evening.
Good evening, your name?
My name is Dickens.
Yes, Dickens.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to ask the director in the studio about demonstrations worldwide. How come that when demonstrations happen in African countries and there are lots of destructions and killings, let's say, by, let's say, rioters, they say, the whites normally say that these people are pro-democracy demonstrators. But when it happens in a white man's country, like what happened recently in London, it becomes criminals, hooligans, why don't you take everything under the same perspective? Why do you discriminate against those things which happen in Africa and then you put those ones which happen in white African, in white countries to be different from ours? Yet all of them are demonstrations and they cause destruction. You see what happened in London and you see what happened in, let's say, Libya and Egypt. Thank you.
One final caller. Spectrum, hello.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Edmond.
Good evening, sir. Your name?
This is UDC in Mukono.
Yes.
Now, there is a lot of injustice in our judiciary. People have no trust in the judiciary because of corruption. And when you hear of these executions going on, more especially in the military, I think this is really unfair. I think the executions should be abolished. Thank you.
Okay, let's get back to the studio. We have one more. Let's take one more right now. Spectrum, hello?
Hello.
Yes, your name?
This is Amo Martin.
Yes.
My two questions are, one, are UN recommendations on human rights to any given country binding on a special country? If yes, what punishments are put in place, say, in case a country fails to honor? Because I'm worried this council might turn out to be a forum for associations and counter associations. Uganda asked US why they went to Iraq. US also asked Uganda why they went to Congo and Somalia. And lastly, do we have the best and worst countries in terms of rankings of all the UN member states? Thank you.
Okay, let's get Paula. Would you like to respond to this?
Sure. I'll start with Jimmy's questions on the issue of trial of state operatives. Indeed, I mean, the whole justice system is a chain. It's not just the arrest of someone. You have to have efficient judiciaries, prosecution. So those are also recommendations that have been made in terms of ensuring fair trial, due process, and timely justice, because everyone says justice delayed is justice denied, and that's very much true. I mean, if you have to wait 5 years to have a decision on a court case, it's not justice. In terms of what are the options when the mechanisms locally aren't available, in the case of Uganda, there actually are. Compared to several countries, there is a good court system. It's true, it takes a long time. There is a backlog. But you also have the Uganda Human Rights Commission, who does issue sentences. The question then is making sure the government pays the compensations that are awarded.
By the Human Rights Commission.
Exactly. So that's another dimension of the justice system, is ensuring that decisions are fulfilled and compensations paid, for example, for the victims. At the international level, I think even better than going to the international level is going to the regional level. And I think in Africa, compared to many regions, you have good systems. So you have the East African Court of Justice, you have the East African Community. In fact, regarding the walk to work, there have been cases brought at the East African level. And you also have the African Commission for Human and People's Rights. So if cases have really not been addressed at the local level, you can start filing petitions at the regional level. But that also takes time, and it also takes resources. So it really is a collaborative effort if you want to raise such an issue to a wider level. But you can also write to rapporteurs. The United Nations and the African Commission as well has a series of rapporteurs that you can write to them, and they'll, on a confidential basis, engage countries to try to get more information, to ask for action, and sometimes with positive results. It's not always the case, but sometimes you can actually get results through this means. On
Martin's question. Are these binding, the recommendations?
The recommendations, are they binding? No. I mean, the United Nations, at the end of the day, is...
It's a peer review.
It's a peer review, the review, this review in particular. But the review is also based on recommendations that were made by the committees. And these committees are created based on the treaties. So if you sign a treaty, you're making an obligation. And then that treaty is justiciable, it's law. So, but of course, the UN is not...
The country can be taken to court.
At the local level, yes. You can bring cases on international law, especially in Uganda. Sometimes it's been disputed because of questions of the dualist system, whether it's national law or not, but I think the country has gone past that. I think several decisions by even the Constitutional Court say that, first of all, the Constitution and the national policy directives are constitutional law, and that international law applies.
All right. So his fears about accusations and counter-accusations, why did you go to Libya and so on, that does not arise, does it?
Okay, that was Dickens, I think, comments.
But didn't ask that question. You know, are these binding? Won't you have, if it's peer review, won't you have people accusing each other? And do you have a list, who best and worst? Very briefly.
Best and worst. No, it really is peer review. It really is about constructive dialogue, sharing best practices, and also highlighting where there is a failure and trying to improve on those. Part of the idea is also to engage international cooperation and support to address the gaps identified.
And very briefly, the proposal to deny bail for people for up to 6 months. Very briefly.
Yes, that was brought up. It said it's against international human rights law.
Peter.
Okay, about the questions asked, I think I'll just try to answer UB3, something like that. You see, we need to differentiate two things, whether in Uganda or UK, is the issue a demonstrator and a rioter.
Yes,
a demonstrator is someone who is doing it peacefully, he doesn't destroy other people's things. So I think even the caller must have seen that many demonstrators who in London or whichever country who are peaceful are not fired live bullets. But the moment they start burning houses, then you move from being a demonstrator to something else, you become a criminal. Which is the same case with Uganda. If you are peacefully demonstrating, maybe you are peacefully walking home, that may not be a crime. But the moment
walk to work, you never heard about walk to work.
Okay, like walk to work. If you are peacefully walking to work,
Besigye was put in a trench.
It is not supposed to be.
Was he being violent sitting down?
That's why they condemn Uganda police for having put him down. But had Besigye picked a stone, the story would have been different, because he would have changed from being a demonstrator to being a
So
riot.
the Ugandan government got it wrong then.
Yeah. Then I wanted maybe briefly to
Very briefly.
take you to something. Uganda government made some voluntary commitments, which possibly Ugandans need to hold the government accountable. After the review, the Uganda government said they will have an annual review of its human rights record.
Right.
They will set up a committee in cabinet which will be reviewing human rights in Uganda, as well as an interministerial committee of technical officers to review issues of human rights in the country. Then the government promised to put a human rights desk in the Ministry of Justice, where members of the community can lodge complaints and follow up. Then to put human rights education in the school curriculum, that is civic education. As you know, right now we don't have any form of civic education. And of course, mainstreaming human rights in all government budgets and proposals. Those are some of the commitments the government of Uganda made, and I think as citizens now we need to start demanding for these ones.
Right.
Yeah.
Since the government promised them themselves. Well, we have to go. Thank you very much to our guests, Miss Paula Simas Magalhães. Did I get that right?
You did.
Okay. Human Rights Officer at the UN Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you very much for coming to Spectrum tonight.
Thank you.
Mr. Peter Magelah, Litigation Officer at HURINET. That's the Human Rights Network. Thank you for coming to Spectrum.
You're welcome.
Thank you for calling in, as well for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond Chisto. Spectrum will be back on Monday. Up next, there's a news in English. Have a very blessed weekend.
Maria,